Hello, I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet, and I want to welcome you to one of our webinars that we hold regularly in GlobalNet 21. We try to hold them in order to tackle a whole range of different topics. And webinars are fun because you get people joining us, not just from London, where we hold our face-to-face meetings, but all over the UK, and in fact, all over the world. And we've got Michael Fisher on here already, I know, who is from Germany. So they're great that way. You can get an audience all over. And because we record it, and we will record it, and we will put it on YouTube, and we'll send the link to you. But because we record it, a lot more people watch the recording, excuse me, than actually come on live. And the recorded viewings are always quite large, and that's really great. So we're doing that. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy this webinar experience, this new system we're using. Most of us who've been on it really think it's really fantastic. So, okay, well, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at community dialogue. In GlobalNet 21, we deal with a lot of issues, and we're focusing on some in more depth. And one of those is community dialogue. And we've already done 2 or 3 or 4 webinars looking at issues like extremism and radicalization, and how some places like Luton have brought people together to tackle that. We've looked at Bradford and peace cities there. We've got a couple more coming up in the future about how people in all sorts of different ways have tried to bring people together to, deal with conflict, resolve conflict, and to take the heat out of what is a precarious situation. Well, today we've got Perry Walker, and you can see him here. He's next to me now, and he's going to talk to us today. Now, Perry has done a webinar with us before some time ago, and Perry is very heavily involved in working in the area of conflict resolution and community dialogue. He's done a lot of work with communities. He's done work with communities here and in other countries like Canada. He's done work not only in just bringing people together in groups, but looking at things like citizens' juries and citizens' assemblies, where people come together to deal with political issues in a non-adversarial way, if that's possible. And so he has a lot of experience in that, and he's going to talk about his sort of talk shops today and what he's done to bring people together in a number of different areas, and what he's doing now or doing in the near future in Birmingham on how to bring people around issues of migration. Now, I won't say any more about that. I'll let Perry come straight into it and talk to you. I hope you get his sound okay. It was breaking up a little bit, but I'm sure it will be okay. But if it does break up a bit, be patient, because I think it will smooth itself out. Anyhow, Perry, thank you for doing this with us. And over to you now, and please start your presentation.
I'm a facilitator by trade. I've also been involved in developing a number of participatory methods, and I did most of this when I worked at a think tank called the New Economics Foundation, where I'm now a fellow, and I'm also a founder of TalkShop, which is a small organization which promotes dialogue across divides and gets people talking, particularly about political issues like the EU referendum or immigration. I'm going to start with, to show the range of approaches taken to this question, 3 from America. I think they got started earlier there. Then one of the critical elements of such dialogue is helping people who may think they have nothing in common to find common ground. So I'm going to illustrate that. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a bit about how our events on immigration work. And then I have a question for you, really, which is to ask you how you can help us, and therefore how you can help this form of dialogue. So the first of the 3 approaches from America I wanted to introduce you to is Conversation Cafe, a variation of something you may well have come across before, which is World Cafe. And the first was started by this woman, Vicky Robin. And as you can see, there were more than 25 such cafes just a few months later. Why did they increase? Well, it was the 9/11 attacks, and the fact that as a result, people wanted a way of processing what they were feeling and sharing it with others. So that's America number 1. And I don't know how legible this is, but they have some very nice guidelines. If you look at the top, bottom right, link and connect ideas, slow down, don't judge, all extremely helpful in this sort of setting. Here now is the second American approach, living room conversations, and the work is set out there. I don't think I need to say very much more, except to emphasize the name, living room conversations. So these are conversations that take place mainly in people's homes in very small groups. So that's an interesting approach. So easier to organize than if you get 50 people together, not so much diversity, but some diversity because of starting point as the two co-hosts with differing views. So that's the second one. And the third one, which I think is the longest established, National Issues Forums. I think they've been going about 20 years. And so when they pick a new topic, here, free speech, they're able to organize a lot of events around America. What you see in the picture is the cover of one of their briefings. So they produce quite comprehensive briefings on whatever issue they choose. I think they tackle 3 or 4 a year. And they tend to offer participants a number of choices, as here, and the purpose of the discussion, as well as to inform people and to allow them to share what they think, is to see where people end up with in relation to those choices. So those are the 3 American. Now I want to go on to the second stage of my presentation, which is having a think about how we can create common ground between people who, to start with anyway, may not think that they have any. Last year, we ran various events, about 10 EU referendum, and almost by accident, really, we found that the most powerful part of our process, of our events, was role play. So some people hate role play, refuse to do it, but quite a few people, we found, most people, were prepared to have a go at arguing a point of view different from their own. And there are a couple of examples of what they got out of it. And I'll just pause there to give you a chance to read that. On the second one, there's a book I've got whose title is I'm Right and You're an Idiot. And so a lot of people think that way, really. And so the role play, I think, did work to counteract that. And the second approach that we take is simply to ask people to identify common ground. And the examples here are from an event that we ran in Birmingham, quite straightforward. But I just wanted to say that in this case, we weren't simply asking people who, what they as a group thought common ground was. Before they did this exercise, we had given them a number of character cards, so cards with different characters, many of them immigrants, based on true stories, but not literally so. And we also asked, so when we asked the people to think about what common ground they could find, we were asking them not only to find common ground on behalf of the people in the room, but also on behalf of all the characters whose stories they'd read and digested. So I hope that stretched their muscles in doing that exercise. And move on to the third way that that common ground can be found. This is very different. The Future Research conferences involve 60 people over 2 or 3 days. And when people come into the room, they see these enormous timelines, usually 3 of them, 30 feet long. Maybe one timeline is for the particular issue, one is for the local place that people live, and the other is national or international. Each timeline is divided into recent decades, and on those timelines, people write events that matter to them. And so they find common ground because they realize that, like many other people, they moved into the area and had kids about the same time, or they care about the Russian invasion of Prague, whatever it might be. In quite a subtle way, they start to find common ground. So that's an essential part of any form of dialogue. And I hope I've shown you that there are different ways to do it. There are many others that I can't show. But something like that needs to be built into any dialogue at the start. And you'll remember that I showed you the guidelines for the Conversation Cafe, and they are also a way of helping people to find ground, to find common ground, to slow down, to listen, to cast off a few of their preconceptions. And I'm now on to the final part of the presentation, which is how TalkShop works. So we don't know who's going to come to these events. They might be all of them pro-immigration, all against immigration, a complete mix. We've no idea. In any event, we're trying to get people into the small groups, which most of the event consists of, and we want those small groups to be as diverse as possible. So the first thing that we do is to ask people to take 5 sticky dots and use them to vote on 9 of these positions, which I'm showing you one. We then create the small groups, and we try to make those as self-managing as possible. And so we do that by putting the instructions on each table so that people can manage their own activities rather than having to be told by us, the facilitators, what to do all the time. So if you can read that, you'll see in the middle it says, in your new group, appoint a new dealer, a new timekeeper, and a scribe. And these are the instructions for seeking the common ground, which I've just illustrated in the last section of my presentation. We give people at various stages various cards that help people, give people a bit of information, and again, I hope stretch their thinking about this subject. Here are a couple: the effect of satellite television on Turkish immigrants, and the meaning of the word integration. So people play with those, choose some out of the hand they've been selected, they've been dealt with, read them out, and so on. And finally, and most illegibly, they construct their own policy, the policy that their small group believes in. You probably can't read it, but right at the bottom it says our policy is that we need a new narrative about shared values. And we then have a preference vote where everybody puts the policies they've heard in order that they of preference, and we can use that to try and find out how much agreement there is in the room and where it lies. And we can do all that in about 2.5 hours. It's quite complex. It's more complex than the 3 American approaches that we showed you before. But we feel that that's worthwhile, partly because we want to make the thing feel like a game, like an activity that's enjoyable, hence the cards, and partly because we do not just want to know what people think individually, but what the group thinks, and we want to put them in the position of being like politicians in the sense of having to make the trade-offs and see where the common ground and the consensus lies. Right, so those are the things I wanted to tell you. So a bit of feedback from people in Birmingham, and nice to hear. But I was, I think, particularly touched by the third of those. But we are trying to make these difficult areas manageable. It's not easy. We don't manage as many events as we would like, and so take a look at those challenges, and then I shall ask you for your help. So that's topics, number 1, partners, number 2, format 3, what else, number 4. So if you have that in mind, I shall go back to me and invite Francis to start the conversation.
Okay, I'm back now, I think. Yep. Okay, well, thanks a lot for doing that, Perry. Just to say, please put any comments. Brad has already started, others have. Please type in your comments. If anybody actually wants to say anything on video, they can. If you raise your hand and let me know, I think there's a little icon below your names. If you go to participants, then if you raise your hand, I can bring you on video. And if you want to talk on video, you can. Fong here is already on, and Fong often helps with the questions. So she's here already, which is great. So we've had something from Brad. Some people have also discovered there is a question and answer icon at the bottom, and you can ask questions that way as well. And Brad has already done that. But let me take up his comment first, Perry, that he says in the chat. He says he's finding that very useful. Brad, by the way, is from British Columbia, and Brad Perry has done some work in British Columbia on the citizens' assemblies there, so he knows British Columbia. But Brad is from British Columbia. Well, you've done some work, I think, or you've told us
I've written about it, sure.
Yeah, you've written about it, yeah. Okay. Well, Brad says he agrees with you. He says participation is a powerful way. The first act, I think he's saying, of actually getting people to understand each other is bringing them together. Now, I suppose that really raises the question, how do you bring them together? How do you get them in the first place?
Well, sometimes the issue is so heated that you can't, so conflict ridden that you can't keep them away. Sometimes our events tend to be open to all comers. That's another approach. Our approach means that simply that everybody has the right to take part, which is a deep belief of mine. Other people use various forms of random selection, citizens' juries, the British Columbia Citizens' Assembly that you referred to, deliberative polls. They tend to use random selection. So that's great in the sense that the conclusions are more likely to reflect the population at large, although you can never be sure because the population at large has not taken part in that discussion. It means that many people don't have the opportunity to come, and even with random selection, it tends to be the activists who accept the invitation. I think they found that in British Columbia, and so none of these is perfect. And if you have the opportunity, I'd advise combining several different approaches of recruiting people, because each one will tap a different audience.
I mean, that's interesting what you said, that it tends to attract the activists. And, a lot of the conflict situations do happen with activists because they're obviously very engaged and they're important audience to get in. But how do you go beyond that? How do you reach a general population to get them into this sort of environment? You've talked about random selection, you talked about deliberative polls and so on, but how can you get other people in who aren't, sort of raring to get in and have a go? Because those are the people sometimes that you've got to bring in and resolve the conflicts that they have in their minds.
I'll start my answer with a story about deliberative polls. So there was James Fishkin, who developed them, showed through the random selection process a particular woman who would need to fly to attend this event in America. And she had never flown before, and she was very nervous about it. And he paid for a friend of hers to come along with her to make her less nervous. Now, that's fantastic. It's fantastic that he did what was necessary to get her to the event. But not many of us have the budget for that sort of thing very often. So it is difficult. Another part of the answer to your question, and this is not from conflict really, is what's the incentive for people to come? So the participants in Porto Alegre, in participatory budgeting in Porto Alegre in Brazil, which has been going for, I think, about 20 years, the average participant has below below average education and below average income. That's very rare in these exercises. It is usually the middle classes who show up. And the reason that they turn up is that they know what they can get out of it. They can get pavements, they can get street lighting, and so on. So making a convincing offer as to what people get out of it, providing feedback, ideally not doing a one-off so that people can come the second or the third time if they don't come the first time. All these things help get people into the room.
Okay, Fong, do you want to come on at all? There's some questions that Brad's asking.
Yeah, Brad, he asked about people, could they change their mind from the beginning of the session to the end of the session after the exercises?
I mean,
yes.
I think he's asking, can you give examples of how that's happened?
Yeah.
Oh, that's stretching me. There was a deliberative poll on crime held in Manchester maybe about 10 years ago, and the number of people who thought that prison was the appropriate response for I'm not sure, maybe medium offences dropped from I think 70% to 50% over the course of a weekend. So it was a significant change, not enough to take people over the line, and so that a minority was in favour, but so it was pretty balanced. But it's worth pointing out that that was a full weekend of activities. A lot of the events that we run are just a couple of hours, and so the scope for influence is less. Just think if I think of another example offhand. That's the clearest example in my mind. So people do change their minds. We don't often know because we don't always ask people what they thought at the start and what they thought at the end, simply for reasons of time. It's also the case that in quite a lot of these events, the starting question evolves. So you might ask people what they think about A, but actually you find out that what they really want to talk about is B. And so comparing what they think about B at the end of the session with what they thought about A at the start doesn't tell you much about how far they changed their minds.
So if you don't ask them how they feel at the beginning and then ask them how they feel at the end, how do you know how successful you've been?
I'm glad you asked that question. So our success criteria are not so much about whether people change their minds. They have much more to do with the level of agreement that we can find between people. I'll give an example. So we ran an event on parish councils, I don't know, 5 years ago. It was about the future powers of local councils. And we had 6 speakers, all advancing pretty different positions, and particularly with the 2 extremes. And we had one of these preference votes about 2/3 of the way through, and people were still quite a long way apart. But what happened was that some of the positions that people were taking, some of the speakers merged their positions, so that was a move towards consensus. So we got down from 6 until 3, and then we held a second preference vote, which showed that 2 of the merged positions were pretty close together. We then looked at them again, and we saw that one was a bottom-up version of the same thing as the other, which was a top-down version. It was possible to merge them. So that was success for us, because out of these disparate 6 positions, we'd created a single position that almost everybody could sign up to.
Okay, Brad has actually put his hand up and said he'd like to come on video. Foolish man. If you'd like to unmute your microphone, Brad, and ask your question and make your point, please do. But you need to unmute yourself first.
I guess I wasn't so much, in my business and my experience online and in the real world dealing with disagreement. People change their mind grudgingly and with great difficulty, and it's a process. But I guess what I was saying, like, and you know, and I understand you approach this realistically, but it's getting, you know, you started off talking about how to create common ground, you know, and nobody's going to change anything until they feel some common footing, something in common with their adversaries, where they feel, oh gosh, we're actually more alike than we thought, or things like that. And you know, you mentioned people, you know, can be quite hostile about a lot of these issues, and you know, and it's, you know, you're not, like I say, you're not going to change somebody's mind in a 2-hour session or even over a weekend, but it's, you know, you're not going to get anywhere until you can reduce the hostility. And you know, the U.S., well, I guess everywhere it seems these days, it's you know, I just see the hostility and the discord and the dislike for the other side, and anything that can reduce that, using your methods of getting people to come together and finding common ground and that sort of thing. So I guess what I was saying or trying to ask was, you know, you set up one of these sessions and you observe people as they come in, and you know, you're going to see it on their faces, and they're ready to rumble. and by the end, you know, is there just a calmer feeling among the people?
Okay, so I mean, how do you deal with that hostility when they come in the room? First of all, I mean, you're faced with it, and before you get to the common ground, you've got to address that problem.
I'm not sure about that. So I like "ready to rumble." That's a great phrase. So the first thing is, you know, we don't set things up in an adversarial way. You know, we don't have a platform with serried ranks of chairs for people to sit in and shout at the speakers on the platform. You know, we put people into small groups. And one of the design questions in this stuff, which connects with Francis's point about whether to ask people at the start what they think, is it may be better not to ask people what they think at the start. Because if people declare themselves to be pro-life or Democrat or whatever it might be, a lot of people feel that they must then dig in and defend their statement. Whereas if people don't say what their stance is at the start, you give them a chance to. Hang on, sorry. Hang on, go away.
Anything can happen in a webinar.
Yeah, sorry about that. So perhaps best not to ask people what they think at the start. And so we get people in small groups, and people are much less likely to shout in small groups than they are in large groups. We do have difficulties with men who want to dominate the conversation. Not quite sure what the answer is to that. We provide guidelines which encourage people to be constructive. I showed you some examples of that. So I've probably not worked in the highest conflict situations, but I've not very rarely felt that people needed to vent their anger before they could be constructive. I always felt that if we set it up right, people's anger would dissipate very quickly.
Yeah, see, this is what I find interesting is you know, just setting the table as you described, and some of those techniques you were showing with your screen share thing there, you know, diffuses a lot of things, you know, before they get there. And you know, and I guess you know, the other thing in my observation of human nature is you know, you have no idea what seeds you're planting.
No.
you know, you're not going to see the result right away because you have no idea what, the person's taken on a new idea, and and who knows where they go with that, or how differently they talk with their family or coworkers, and they could kind of subconsciously take on some of these new things they've learned in the workshops and so on.
Well, it is sometimes possible to find out. So I ran one of these Future Search conferences in Hampshire and in England, and a German woman who was doing her PhD on them evaluated those conferences and did contact a lot of people later. And I remember one of the people saying that she'd always remembered what one of the facilitators, I don't know if it was me, said about listening, and she'd become a better listener in her life as a result. And I remember another evaluation in which a woman said there was one particular piece of information about stem cells, I think, and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. One particular piece of information that totally changed her mind on the issue.
Okay, Phong, do you want to come in on anything here?
Yes, I have a good question. So the results that you have got from your workshops, how did you use them and how did you share them?
It depends on the topic. So with the EU referendum events that we ran last year, we were simply hoping to help individuals be clearer on which way they might vote. So it was not a question of collecting the aggregate results at all. The events that we're trying to set up now on immigration, that's completely different. We were inspired by reading that the Home Affairs Select Committee of Parliament in the UK was conducting an inquiry on immigration, and that they hoped to find a consensus. And it's very rare to see the word consensus in anything to do with British politics. So we thought that's fantastic. Yeah. So we made a link with them, and we will send them our results.
Yes. So may I go back to there when you help people to learn how to vote, or to make up their mind, to clear their mind, what to decide to do. How about the general election? Did you help people to understand what they should vote, or what Labour want?
No. I think our events work better with greater focus than that. We have these sets of cards. I showed you some about immigration, and if we turn up thinking that people want to talk about one issue in relation to the general election, and actually they want to talk about something completely different, then our materials and our process is not going to work very well.
Okay. Did you want to follow up on that?
Yes, I like the games. I like all the games that you show before, like role play, because role play, I know about it before. It can change people completely when they play a person that they are not, that they can see the problem from the other person. It is totally, it's very, very, strong. So do you have any examples of how it had worked for you? Because I don't know how many people you can put in the groups, because role plays, it's just not like 2-3 people. It's very intense.
I mean, we do quite a light version. So for the EU referendum events, we could try and get people into pairs where each person in the pair took a different stance, and then really they'd swap positions. So we weren't getting 2 or 3 people to do it, I don't know, to perform to everybody else. We were trying to get everybody who would agree to it to play a role.
Okay. I mean, in all the methods you use, you talk about finding common ground, role play, someone taking the opposite side to their own view. Are any of those, do you think, more successful than others? Or is it, horses for courses? Do you have to decide what you're going to do for the audience you've got?
Well, we also decide what we do based on how long we've got. So the timelines, for example, which is part of the 2 or 3 day future search, they take several hours to do and to process. And so for the talk shop events, we just don't have long enough. And so we're always looking for things that will work quickly in a short space of time, because that's the nature of our events. So, you know, role play, you can get quite a long way in 10 minutes, 20 minutes. So that's really good. And as Phong says, it has the element of a game, which people mostly like. And that helps people get into the constructive spirit that we're trying to create. So I think, Francis, really, the answer is horses for courses.
Okay. By the way, everyone, if you want to come on video like Brad did, please put your hand up and I will bring you onto the panel and you can ask questions on video or audio. You don't have to, don't feel you have to, but if you want to, please do. Okay. And Brad, if you want to come in again, or Phong, please let me know. But let me ask you the sort of the big question I have in mind. You obviously deal a lot with conflict resolution, you deal with community dialogue, you deal with it in a sort of macro environment, a micro environment where people are together in small groups. How do you know that they don't go back native when they leave? I mean, they have a nice time with you, they become friends, they talk to each other, they go back to their own peer groups and they take on their old attitudes that they had before. How can you make what you do sustainable?
Nice one. Again, I'm relying on some evaluations where people were contacted, you know, after some time after they took part, and what you find is that people may forget a lot of the information they learned, but if they've identified new values that they believe in, values that connect with the issue in hand, that sticks. And I think an aspect of people, sorry, if I can go back to an earlier question about the effect to which people change their minds, that implies that people knew what their mind was at the start. And with a lot of the complex issues that we're dealing with, especially ones to do with, say, new technology, people don't know what they think at the start, or don't have a very well thought through view. And part of what we do is help people to identify and maybe resolve dilemmas in their own thinking. And I think if they do that, that dilemma stays resolved. Some of the other effects that we found through these evaluations are that people are more attentive to what's going on in the media. So previously there's some issue that they might have dismissed because they didn't have a basic understanding of it. Now they've been through a process and they pay more attention to it. And I think the evidence is that, on balance, the evidence is that some of the effect wears off, you're right, but the people, by no means all, and the people retain quite a lot of the changes in thinking that they went through during the event.
Go on, sorry.
Well, when the time is right, Francis, I wonder if we could go back to my final screen and I could ask for the assistance of the distinguished company here present on some of the challenges and dilemmas that we have as Talk Shop. Okay, so your first question is what topics grab people? I mean, does anyone on here like to make an answer to that? I mean, what's one of the biggest divides that we're trying to bridge?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Brad, but we can't see you.
I've frozen again. I don't know how to resolve that issue, but in any case, it doesn't matter. Yeah, topics. You know, this is just in my broader understanding of human nature, and you know, I think at one point in your you talked about people feel insecure, I think might have been the wording. I can't remember the wording, but you know, when they feel their resources are threatened. And you know, and this is, you know, you can look through evolutionary history, and this is how any creature, you know, in evolutionary history will react. You know, we're all okay with each other when things are aplenty. but when the resources start to feel a pinch, and you know, that could be money, jobs, housing, you know, these real, you know, these are basic survival things, and when people feel threatened in any way, you know, that's going to be their hot topics, and immigration is just, you know, when jobs are plenty, the housing is good, the economy's good, nobody cares about immigration. Everybody's happy. But, you know, when those things start to get a crunch, everybody starts to look around for, you know, the newcomers, or, you know, the threats. And yeah, and I think anything to do with jobs, housing, income is going to be, you know, the real core topic. And, you know, like you were saying, Perry, people seldom really understand, you know, what's pissing them off, if I may say. And your workshops, you know, just getting people to identify what's going on is a huge, important step alone. Because, you know, fear is often very confusing. You have, you know, in a confusing world, you don't really know why you're all geared up. It's just, you know, so I think that's a fabulous part of the workshops right there. Just
Okay.
Sorry, I tend to babble. I'll stop.
Yeah, no. So I'm just trying to get other people to type in as well. If you've got anything you want to type in, please do. I mean, do you want to add to that, Fong, what you think think divides this?
I think that people are thinking about different things. Like I have a 14 years old, so I'm thinking a lot about bullying and poverty, because I think that a lot of people, when they think that they are poor, or they are very resent and can bully other people, and that's what I'm thinking of, because that's what I'm seeing every day. But job, I also think about job, but job is just for me, but my son is bullying. So I think there are a lot of different things that people are thinking of.
So I mean, if anybody else wants to type in, please do. And will you answer that, Perry? Maybe you want to put your questions back up on the screen so we can all see the second one as well.
Or can we have a cut and paste into the chat? Maybe, I don't know.
Well, if it's possible. It might be difficult to do that from the PowerPoint. It might take too long. But if you put it up, that would be great.
Sure.
So, I mean, the first question we saw, and okay, the second question then is, how do we establish a network of partners? Maybe you could explain that first. What partners are you talking about, Perry?
Well, our perfect partners, I think, would be people who had you know, branches or groups all over the country. I work mainly in the UK, and so we could get a lot of events organized, have a large reach through that single organization.
Oh, so you mean, how do you get other people interested in what you're doing in a network of people who can engage on the sort of dialogue that you're talking about? So you're looking for those sort of partners who want to be involved. Has anybody got any ideas about that? I mean, you work with, for example, you know, groups that work with children and young mums, don't you? And Fong, and I mean, that would be a sort of area that would be quite interested in this.
Yes, I tried to get a network of schools and children's center, women's center, and job center, because the fathers, you know, it is also about job and about parents. So that's what I try. And also Francis has very good idea helping me with trying to connect with people, and also you need a platform. You not just network, you also need a platform to put them together and then work together.
And Brad, how do you, in the work you do, and because you work in the area of mental health, how do you get your partners? How do you bring people together there?
Well, welcome to cat herding. You know, I don't even know what to say about how I work. It just, you know, I use social media. I was talking about mental health and the brain and all this stuff, but I had my own narrative going at the same time, and you know, and it just kind of took off, and but that is, you know, the initial buzz around that and social media has changed even in the last few years, and with the, you know, the political stuff going on, you know, that's kind of attracted people's attention more. So I don't really know. I'm in the same boat. I'm you know, I need to attract audience and participants and so on, and you know, it's been a bit frustrating, frankly. So you know, which is why, I guess, why I'm participating here. So I'm sorry, I don't really have much to add as to how, but just to sort of state that, yeah, it can be difficult and frustrating, and like I say, it's like cat herding, and you know, people I know who've been in this kind of thing for a long time, you know, it's not a new problem, and it's one of those things that's hard to capture.
I think the best advice is probably to start 30 years ago.
Get the time machine.
I mean, I think that's a joke, but it's very real. I think building up a network is not done overnight, is it, Perry? It takes a long time.
Sure.
And some people fool themselves into believing that they can set a network up almost instantly and they'll be successful, and then they get very frustrated and they drop out. So how do you maintain your own sanity and your longevity in this project, knowing that it takes that amount of time?
Oh, that's faith, Francis. I wonder if I could come back to the question of topics, because when you were talking about topics, I was thinking about, say, artificial intelligence, which could have an enormous effect on our lives, replace millions of jobs and so on. And there must be a sort of sweet spot. If you talk about these things too early, most people are not bothered, not on their radar. If you talk about them too late, the policy is set in stone, and you can't have much influence, and so why should people take part in the conversation? So I would like to think, but I'm not quite sure where to find it, that there is this sweet spot where people know about the issue, but policy is not yet set in stone. I've been talking to people about driverless cars, because I think that's something also really important to talk about. And I had two successive conversations. One with somebody who said there was no point talking about it because it was about to arrive, and somebody else who's involved with road haulage who said there was no point talking about it because his members didn't believe it would happen.
All right. I mean, how do we market let's take the two questions together in a way. How do we market an unfamiliar format? I mean, what Perry is doing is something that people is not always used to. They're used to public meetings or debates. And what gets people to come along? How do you actually market that? Has anyone got any ideas about that at all that you'd like to put up? Okay. And Phong, have you got anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I think that maybe coffee shop, or you know, it's sometimes nowadays people do a lot of things at a coffee shop. Yes.
Okay, and I suppose that the YouTube channel that we set up on Community Dialogue is one way of trying to get out that there are other ways of doing things, and working with 2 or 3 partners. We're working with someone in the north of England and also in Sunderland Partnership to try and look at different case studies of good practice of dialogue. And if we can get lots of case studies together so people can see, you know, what is possible, then I think that helps to get the network. Talking about it in the abstract often turns people off. Giving them a story that you tell, and you mentioned earlier, Perry, about storytelling being very important, but having a story to tell, I think is really vital in all that.
I absolutely agree, Francis. Yeah, the narrative and making it more concrete and less abstract is really important.
Okay, so we're getting close to the end, Perry. I mean, is there anything you want to say finally?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Peter for his comment and to agree, really. And the events that we've been talking about this evening are much more active, much more participative than the traditional ones, and they do give a much greater opportunity for people to make their voice heard. But I think there is a downside to that, which is that quite a few people are worried in advance that it won't be safe, that they'll get shouted at or something like that, that they'll get bullied in the meeting. So telling stories that demonstrate that this is a different type of event where actually people are more safe, that's a good challenge to end with.
And how do you make them feel that it's a safe place to be?
Well, once people have come, they've had the experience, so perhaps we should make more use of inviting people who've come already to invite people who have not yet been. I think maybe sort of short videos that people can watch to get the impression of what it's like beforehand help. Those are my best ideas. I'm sure there are better.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for doing that. I mean, I think that was a really good discussion, a good to and fro discussion with people contributing. So thank you, Phong and Brad and Peter, and for those who've come on and listened. And I hope it's been useful for you, because there's a great need for a lot of experiments in community dialogue and finding different ways of doing it. And there's also a great need then to see how we, take the things we do at a micro level and turn it into a macro project as well. How we, make sure that when people have been in a situation where their attitudes and their views have changed, when they go back into the wider world, that has an impact. And then we have to find ways of dealing with community dialogue between communities and not just between people as well. So looking at all of those things, I think, is really important. And I hope we'll do more of that. And we'll put that on our YouTube channel. As I said, we will have this recorded. We'll go on the YouTube channel and we'll send a link of the recording out to you, and also to those who have registered and not arrived tonight, because lots of people do register or express an interest in order to watch the recording, not necessarily to come on. So we'll make sure they get it as well. So thank you, Perry, for doing that. And that was great. And that was a really good contribution to the work that we're doing. And I'm really grateful to that.